The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of the courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden benches. Outside, the usual hum of city life pressed against the building's walls, cars honking, people rushing to work. But inside, a different kind of tension held the air captive. Uniformed officers patrolled the corridors with alert eyes, the clinking of handcuffs and polished boots echoing faintly in the hall. Cameras from local news crews lined the edges of the room, their lenses trained on a single point of fascination. A tiny girl no older than 3, sitting quietly on her mother's lap. Her coat was pink and slightly oversized, the hood hanging loose around her small shoulders. In her hands, she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit, its fur fraying from repeated hugs and whispered secrets. Her legs dangled from the bench, swinging slightly, and she didn't fidget or cry, though her wide eyes, dark, liquid, and unnervingly observant, took in every detail of the courtroom. The judge, an imposing man in his 60s, shuffled papers at the front, his brow furrowed, sensing the unusual energy radiating from this tiny witness. Across the room, a massive police K9 sat alert, his fur sleek and muscles taut beneath his harness. The dog's handler knelt beside him, whispering commands, fingers brushing the leash, but the animal's attention was fixed entirely on the girl. Officers nearby exchanged nervous glances. They had seen the K9 react to tense suspects, aggressive criminals, even chaotic crowds, but never to a toddler. The tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. The prosecutor cleared his throat, glancing down at the notes clutched tightly in his hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm but firm, "today we hear from a witness whose perspective is unique. She observed critical events the night of the incident and may provide clarity no other evidence can." His eyes flicked toward the mother and daughter, acknowledging the enormity of the moment. Every camera zoomed in, every pen poised, every breath held. The mother shifted, brushing a strand of hair behind her daughter's ear, whispering something inaudible, a tiny gesture of reassurance. The girl didn't flinch. She merely adjusted her grip on the rabbit, her knuckles white against the worn fabric. The air in the room seemed to thrum with anticipation. Reporters scribbled furiously, some whispering to one another about the oddity of it all. A toddler in a high-profile courtroom, facing a trained police dog, poised as though she understood the stakes in ways adults could barely imagine. Then the judge's gavel came down with a crisp bang. Silence fell. The girl's dark eyes flicked briefly toward the bench, then back at the K9. In that instant, something unspoken passed between the child and the dog. The massive animal's ears pricked, his head tilting slightly as if he, too, recognized the weight of the moment. A low, almost imperceptible growl rumbled from his throat. Officers shifted in their seats, hands inching toward their belts, instinctively alert yet cautious. The toddler's lips parted slightly and she whispered, a sound so soft it might have been mistaken for the wind brushing against the courtroom windows. Only a few people close enough to her heard it. The word was clear, deliberate, and simple. Stop. Immediately, the K9 froze, muscles stiffening like a statue carved from muscle and sinew. His tail stopped wagging, his eyes locked on the girl. The handler's voice faltered mid-command, a tremor betraying his disbelief. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing, trying to process what had just occurred. How could a child, barely able to articulate full sentences, command the attention and obedience of a fully trained police dog? The mother's heart raced, a mixture of fear, pride, and disbelief. She squeezed her daughter's hand gently, whispering reassurance. "You're okay," she said softly. The girl blinked once, then, with an almost imperceptible nod, sat back slightly, still clutching the rabbit. But the energy in the room had shifted. The buzz of whispered speculation and camera clicks replaced the usual monotony of the morning session. Everyone sensed, instinctively, that what they were about to witness was extraordinary. As the prosecutor called the first witness, a neighbor who had seen parts of the night's events, the toddler's gaze wandered briefly to the window. She traced the patterns of the light on the floor with her eyes, as if cataloging details invisible to everyone else. Her small voice, when it finally came again, was calm, eerily steady. "He went that way." She pointed a tiny, unshaking finger toward the far corner of the courtroom. The K9 growled low in his throat, a sound that resonated in the chest of every adult present. The handler's hand froze on the leash. A shiver ran through the courtroom. It wasn't just the sound of the growl, but the understanding in it, an acknowledgement that the toddler's words carried weight, authority, even in ways that seemed impossible. Cameras zoomed in on her tiny hand, the slight tilt of her head, the intense focus in her eyes. This was a child who saw things adults could not, who navigated fear and danger with a clarity that was both chilling and mesmerizing. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, a reminder of the chaos that had brought them here. Inside, the courtroom seemed suspended in time, caught between disbelief and awe. Journalists whispered to one another, wondering if the story they were about to tell would defy logic, stretching across news feeds like wildfire. Every adult present, from seasoned lawyers to veteran officers, felt the magnetic pull of this tiny witness. She was small, almost fragile, yet her presence was commanding. Then, without warning, she leaned slightly forward, eyes locked on the K9. Her lips moved just enough for those nearest to hear. "Don't move." The dog's massive body froze completely, muscles taut as wire. The handler's eyes widened, disbelief etched across his face. Even the judge, a man who had seen decades of courtroom drama, leaned forward, silent, captivated. The air was so thick with tension it felt as though it would crack. The room held its collective breath. What could a toddler possibly know that adults could not? And how was it that a word so small, spoken by such a tiny human, could hold the power to halt a seasoned, trained police K9 in its tracks? No one spoke. Cameras rolled. Every officer, lawyer, and journalist waited for the next move. The tiniest shift of the girl's hand, the faintest whisper, could change everything. And in that heartbeat of silence, the entire courtroom realized something extraordinary was unfolding, something that would leave an imprint on everyone present forever. Suspense. What exactly does this toddler know, and how did she possess such uncanny control over a police dog trained for danger? The courtroom had barely settled after the toddler's first whispered words when the prosecutor called the first official witness. It was a neighbor, a man in his 40s with a graying beard, who lived directly across the alley where the crime had unfolded. His voice trembled slightly as he described the chaos of that night: screeching tires, shouting voices, and a bag tossed into the shadows like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The details were grim, yet incomplete, fragments that hinted at danger, but left gaps only the child could fill. The toddler's dark eyes followed every movement in the room. She didn't fidget. She didn't play with her rabbit or murmur to her mother. She watched, absorbed, calculating. The K9 sat like a statue across the aisle, its massive head swiveling to track her every glance. Officers whispered, incredulous. They had handled hundreds of cases, seen countless witnesses, but this was something new, something unnerving. When the prosecutor finally knelt down to speak to her, he did so carefully, knowing that even the slightest intimidation could collapse the fragile bridge between fear and cooperation. "Can you tell us what you saw that night?" he asked, his tone soft, coaxing. The girl's mother squeezed her hand gently, whispering a reminder. The toddler nodded ever so slightly, her dark eyes bright with awareness. Her first words were small, almost a breath: "Car, fast, red." The prosecutor blinked. That was it. But the meaning was clear. She had seen the red car speeding down the alley just before the suspect fled. Officers near the bench leaned forward, trying to process the significance of a toddler identifying a vehicle with such specificity. The defense attorney frowned, skeptical, muttering under his breath, but even he could not ignore the attention in the room. Then came the second detail, soft yet precise. Bag, black, fallen. She mimed the movement with her tiny hands, tilting them as if demonstrating the weight and shape. The K9 growled low, a sound that resonated with the tension in the air. The handler's hand instinctively went to the leash, only to hesitate, the dog unmovable, staring at the toddler as if awaiting instructions only she could provide. The room fell silent. Journalists leaned forward, scribbling furiously. Cameras zoomed in on the child's tiny gestures, capturing the exact moment the K-9 stiffened, obedient to her unspoken authority. Witnesses exchanged glances, some incredulous, some skeptical, and some quietly shaking their heads in disbelief. The prosecutor paused, letting the moment sink in. Then with care he asked about the suspect himself. The girl's voice, soft but unnervingly steady, floated through the courtroom. "Man, tall, coat." She mimed a sweeping motion, pointing to the length of the jacket. The K-9 growled again, ears pricked, body coiled like a spring. Officers whispered to each other. Could this child really perceive danger so clearly? Could she read a human the way trained animals do? A hush fell. The judge leaned forward, gripping the edges of the bench. Even he, a man who had presided over decades of courtroom drama, could not hide the flicker of disbelief in his eyes. He watched the toddler carefully, noting the intensity in her gaze, the precision of her words, and the authority in her gestures. Something about the simplicity of her speech, the way she combined observation with action, commanded attention beyond her years. The defense attorney, skeptical but desperate to maintain control, attempted to undermine the testimony. "Your Honor, may I remind the court that this is a 3-year-old child," he said sharply. How can her words hold any weight against trained officers, surveillance evidence, and documented facts? The toddler, seemingly unfazed, leaned forward slightly and whispered again, "Blue car, corner, hide." She pointed to an empty corner of the courtroom with a precision that made the handler flinch. The K-9 froze mid-step, muscles taut, refusing to move forward. Even the most seasoned officers in the room exchanged uneasy glances. A word, a gesture, a child controlling an animal trained to respond only to professionals. It was inexplicable, yet undeniable. The mother, sensing the growing tension, squeezed her daughter's hand once more. "You're doing fine," she whispered. The girl blinked slowly, almost knowingly, before turning her gaze back to the empty space her tiny finger indicated. There was no fear in her eyes, only focus. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters murmured, scribbled, whispered to one another. This story would explode beyond the courthouse, they all knew it. Cameras caught the moment perfectly. A toddler, fearless, unflinching, seemingly holding the fate of an entire case in her hands, while a massive police K-9 obeyed her every subtle cue. It was a tableau of tension, disbelief, and unspoken power. Then came the words that made even the judge pause. With a calmness that defied her age, the toddler whispered, "Stop there, no step." She indicated a spot directly in front of the defendant, her finger hovering mid-air. The dog halted instantly, chest rising and falling in rigid anticipation. The courtroom collectively held its breath. How could a child, smaller than the K-9's paw, dictate its movement with such authority? The prosecutor leaned closer, voice low but urgent. "Do you remember what happened next?" he asked. The toddler's lips pursed, eyes narrowing as though recalling a story only she could see. Then, almost imperceptibly, she whispered, "He ran, fast, behind fence." She mimed the escape with tiny, precise gestures, tracing the man's path across invisible streets, past imagined obstacles. At that moment, officers quietly consulted among themselves. Surveillance had been checked. The evidence was circumstantial, incomplete, but the toddler's words and gestures matched every detail they had observed at the scene. The room was filled with an electric tension. The defense attorney, desperate, leaned in, whispering to his client, but the accused's face betrayed panic, his eyes darting nervously toward the girl. The mother noticed the subtle change in the courtroom, the collective intake of breath, the shift in energy. She whispered softly to her daughter, "It's okay, you're helping." The girl nodded slightly, rocking her rabbit as if drawing courage from it, yet her gaze remained fixed on the K-9, guiding it silently with her authority. Even journalists, accustomed to sensational stories, leaned in, capturing every moment. The child, the dog, the tension between innocence and control. Outside, the city continued its daily hum, unaware of the drama unfolding within these walls. But inside, a single, small voice had become the center of a storm, commanding attention far beyond its size. The judge finally spoke, voice steady but cautious. "We will proceed with this testimony, noting the unusual circumstances," he said, eyes locked on the toddler. "But let us continue carefully." Cameras whirred. Pens scratched. Hearts raced. The world seemed to hold its breath as the tiny witness prepared to reveal the next layer of truth, unaware of the impact her words and gestures would have on everyone in the room. Suspense. What will this toddler reveal next, and how far does her understanding of the night's events extend? Could her observations alone determine the fate of the accused? The courtroom fell silent as the toddler's tiny words lingered in the air, echoing against polished wood and high ceilings. Officers whispered to each other, incredulous, exchanging glances heavy with disbelief. The judge, leaning forward in his chair, scribbled notes furiously, though his brow furrowed. How could such a small child have witnessed so much with startling clarity? Her mother shifted uncomfortably, yet stayed calm, as though she had been expecting this moment. When asked to recount the night in question, she began softly, her voice tinged with unease, detailing a series of events that seemed almost cinematic in their terror. The toddler, she explained, had been awake in her bedroom, tucked safely beneath a warm blanket, when the headlights first appeared on the alley behind their home. "I heard her whisper my name," the mother testified, her voice shaking. "She was pointing to the window, eyes wide. She said there was a man carrying a bag and she was frightened." The courtroom seemed to draw in its breath collectively. Even the defense attorney, typically impassive, leaned forward, scrutinizing every syllable. The toddler, seated on her mother's lap, rocked slightly back and forth, her stuffed rabbit pressed to her chest. She tilted her head, eyes wide and dark, recalling details only a child of 3 could perceive with such acute precision. When the prosecutor knelt again, voice gentle and coaxing, she mimicked a scene from the night, her tiny hands slicing through the air. The man running across the alley, his silhouette dark against the glare of a single streetlight, the heavy bag swinging from his hands. "Where did he go?" the prosecutor asked softly, leaning down so she could see him clearly. "Fence," she whispered, tilting her hands to indicate the obstacle. "Behind fast." Her words were simple, almost childlike, yet every motion carried clarity and certainty. The K-9, massive and alert, tilted his head, ears pricked. Every muscle in his body coiled as if mimicking her recollection. Officers leaned forward, noting the eerie synchronicity between the toddler's gestures and the animal's reaction. The mother explained further, voice tight with emotion, that her daughter had observed everything from the window. Headlights flickering over brick walls, shadows darting across pavement, muffled shouts that went unnoticed by adult ears. The child's memory, she said, was sharp, almost photographic, an astonishing retention of events for someone so young. She described the fear in her daughter's eyes that night, the urgency with which she had insisted something was wrong, and how she had communicated the danger with words too precise for her age. Journalists scribbled furiously, capturing quotes, gestures, and reactions. Cameras zoomed on the toddler's tiny fingers tracing the path she had witnessed, mapping a man's escape as though she were drawing invisible lines across the courtroom floor. The defendant's face paled, eyes darting nervously to the girl, mouth twitching with a flicker of panic. Something about her gaze, so steady and observant, seemed to strip away the layers of adult pretense and leave nothing but truth exposed. Then, almost imperceptibly, she added, "He dropped it." She pointed toward an imaginary corner near the alley, her fingers stiff and exact. A hush fell. Officers exchanged silent nods. The bag described matched the one recovered at the scene. The detail was precise down to the way it fell, confirming information that no adult witness had been able to provide. The courtroom, normally brimming with confidence in procedure and protocol, felt the shift. This child was no ordinary witness. Flashbacks were projected in the minds of everyone present. The man fleeing, the K-9 in hot pursuit, the chaos of sirens and lights, the terrified witnesses scattered across the street. The toddler's reenactment added clarity to the disorder, a trail of movement, a chain of events that pieced together fragments of a crime scene that had initially seemed almost impossible to reconstruct. Her gestures were fluid yet deliberate, almost as if she were directing a movie in real time. The defense attorney, increasingly desperate, attempted to challenge her credibility. "Your Honor," he whispered urgently, "this child could be imagining events. Children have vivid imaginations. How can we trust her memory?" The judge glanced down at the girl. She met his gaze briefly, dark eyes unflinching, lips pressed in concentration. Her tiny head tilted and she whispered, "Not imagine, see." The courtroom collectively froze. Even the judge leaned back in his chair, absorbing the authority in that single word. The K-9 growled low, body stiff, responding to a command no adult had given. Officers whispered in disbelief. The child's perception was undeniable, and the dog seemed to recognize it instinctively. The prosecutor pressed forward, carefully unraveling the events. "Can you show us where he ran?" he asked. The toddler stood slowly on her mother's lap, balancing precariously, and traced a precise path through the air, indicating the route the man had taken down the alley, past the dumpsters, around the fence. Each gesture was meticulous. Each motion drew gasps. Cameras captured every nuance. Reporters whispered to each other. The story they were witnessing would go viral before the day ended. The flashback continued as the toddler mimicked the man's frantic steps. "Turn," she whispered, tilting her hand to signal a corner. "Jump, fence." The K-9 stiffened again, muscles coiled, ears swiveling, every instinct in perfect harmony with the child's recounting. Officers glanced at each other, the unspoken question clear. How could a toddler communicate so effectively with a trained animal? And how could she recall the night's chaos with such precision? Even the defendant could no longer hide his unease. Sweat beaded his forehead, eyes darting nervously toward the tiny witness, then to the K-9, whose massive frame remained rigid. The room felt claustrophobic, charged with energy, as though the walls themselves recognized the gravity of the moment. Every adult in the room, the judge, the lawyers, the officers, the journalists, was silently acknowledging that this child had seen and remembered more than anyone had anticipated. Then came the detail that made the courtroom collectively inhale in shock. The toddler whispered, "Scratches, jacket, red." She traced the marks in the air with her tiny fingers, her gestures replicating the crime scene evidence, down to the scratches on the suspect's coat. Officers immediately confirmed the accuracy of her description with the evidence at hand. Murmurs rippled through the room, disbelief mingling with awe. Every journalist present clicked cameras, capturing the moment that would define the story. A toddler, just 3 years old, describing the critical evidence with flawless precision. The mother, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment, brushed a loose strand of hair from her daughter's face, whispering softly, "You're doing wonderfully." The toddler nodded ever so slightly, still rocking her rabbit in one hand while gesturing with the other, completely absorbed in reliving and articulating the night's events. Her small body radiated focus, courage, and a wisdom beyond her years. As the flashback came to a close, the courtroom was silent but for the scratching of pens and the soft hum of equipment. The prosecutor exhaled slowly, acknowledging the weight of the testimony. Every adult present felt the undeniable truth. This tiny girl had witnessed, memorized, and communicated events in a way that defied expectations. The K-9 remained poised, alert, responding as if she were its master. Suspense. How could a toddler, barely 3, recall such precise details, communicate them so effectively, and command the obedience of a massive police dog? And what other revelations lay ahead as the courtroom prepared to hear the next piece of this astonishing story? The courtroom was tense beyond measure. Every adult present could feel the weight of the moment, as though the walls themselves had shrunk to focus on the tiny witness and the massive K-9 before her. The toddler's small fingers hovered in the air, her dark eyes tracking the dog's every movement. She clutched her stuffed rabbit in one hand, yet her other hand gestured imperceptibly, guiding the K-9 in a silent, almost invisible dialogue. The K-9, trained to respond to the most subtle commands, stiffened at her every flick of the wrist, every shift of her gaze. His handler whispered the usual prompts: sit, stay. The animal ignored them. The courtroom watched in stunned silence. A seasoned police dog, obedient to experienced officers in life-or-death scenarios, now responded exclusively to a toddler's cues. The prosecutor leaned in, whispering gently, "Can you show us where the man ran?" The girl blinked once, then pointed softly with her index finger, tracing a path through the air that mirrored the alley behind her home. The K9's massive head followed her gesture, muscles taut, as if reading a language only the child understood. A low growl emanated from deep within the dog's chest, vibrating through the floorboards and into the legs of the nearest officers. Murmurs rose among them, some fearful, some incredulous, all captivated. The defense attorney, struggling to maintain composure, whispered sharply to his client, "This is absurd. A child cannot control a trained police dog. It's impossible." But the defendant's eyes betrayed panic. Every instinct screamed that the toddler's accuracy was undeniable. Every detail she mimed, the path, the obstacles, the objects in the alley, matched the evidence recovered by the police. The toddler's gaze flicked momentarily to the bag recovered from the scene. Her tiny fingers moved delicately, pointing to where it had fallen. The K9's body tensed further, ears swiveling, eyes fixed on the child as if he, too, recognized her authority. Officers leaned forward, whispering to one another. None could explain why a 3-year-old commanded such control over an animal trained to act only on professional commands. A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge, an imposing figure accustomed to decades of law and order, exhaled slowly. He could feel the tension knotting his stomach. Never had he presided over a witness whose testimony transcended words, where gesture, gaze, and subtle vocalizations held equal weight. "Proceed carefully," he murmured, almost to himself. The prosecutor nodded, aware of the delicate line they were walking. The toddler then whispered softly, a word so precise that the nearest officers instinctively leaned closer. "Stop." The dog froze mid-step, muscles locked, and refused to advance. The handler's fingers trembled on the leash, caught between instinct and obedience to the child's silent command. Cameras rolled, reporters clicked, and the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. A child's voice, small, fragile, innocent, had dictated the movement of a creature trained for aggression, speed, and obedience. The energy in the room was electric. The prosecutor encouraged her gently, "Show us what happened next." The toddler tilted her head, closed her eyes briefly as if summoning the memory in vivid detail, and gestured a sweeping motion with her tiny hands. "Turn corner, fence," she whispered, each word deliberate. The K9 mirrored her motions, every muscle taut, every paw frozen in anticipation. Officers exchanged incredulous glances. Could the child truly direct the dog as though she were its master? And more importantly, could she recall the path with such precision? Journalists scribbled notes furiously. Cameras focused on the tableau. A toddler, no more than 3 years old, commanding a massive trained K9 with words and gestures almost imperceptible to adults. The public would see this later as a moment of near magic, but inside the courtroom, it was a tense blend of disbelief and awe. The mother, sensing the magnitude of the situation, whispered quietly to her daughter, "You're doing fine. Just show them what you saw." The toddler nodded slightly, rocking her rabbit in one hand while extending her other hand to indicate the bag's position and the path the man had taken. Her gestures were fluid yet exact, precise enough to map a crime scene without a single error. The defense attorney, growing desperate, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. A child cannot provide evidence of such complexity and a dog cannot respond to her commands. This is nonsense." The judge raised a hand, calm but firm. "Sit down. Let the record reflect the testimony is proceeding." Even he could not mask the flicker of curiosity and disbelief in his eyes. Everyone in the courtroom understood. This was no ordinary testimony. The toddler's attention shifted briefly to the K9. Her gaze locked with the animal's eyes, and in a whisper, Almost like a secret shared between them, she said, "Stay." The dog obeyed instantly, sitting rigidly, head high, muscles taut. The handler whispered under his breath, "I don't understand, he's never done that before." The officers leaned in, some shaking their heads, others simply watching in awe. Even the journalists, trained to find skepticism in every detail, were captivated. The prosecutor guided her gently, prompting, "Where did he run next?" The girl's tiny hands traced the movement of the man across the imaginary alley, illustrating every obstacle, every shift in direction. Her gestures were accompanied by soft, precise whispers: "Jump, fence, hide behind." The K9's body mirrored her, responsive to a language no adult had taught him, obeying a command that seemed almost telepathic. Every detail matched the recovered evidence: the bag, the scratches, the fence. Officers quietly verified their notes, double-checked the angles, and exchanged looks that spoke volumes. This child, in her innocence and clarity, had recreated a criminal's path with perfect accuracy. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even the judge, who had seen decades of impossible courtroom moments, leaned forward, absorbed by the small figure directing the room's largest and most disciplined animal. It was a scene that defied logic: a toddler, a K9, and a crime scene reenacted with terrifying precision. Then, in the softest, most deliberate voice she could manage, the toddler whispered again, "Not there." She pointed to a spot near the defendant's chair. The K9 froze instantly, ears pricked, head locked. The handler's fingers trembled. Officers shifted uneasily. Every adult in the room felt the intensity of that moment. The courtroom was no longer a stage for routine testimony. It had become a theater of extraordinary perception. Journalists clicked their pens, cameras zoomed in, and the hush stretched taut, almost unbearable. The tiny girl had taken control of the narrative in ways no one could have imagined. The K9's reactions were undeniable proof that she possessed an instinct, or perhaps a skill, beyond her years. The mother whispered again, "You're helping everyone see." The toddler nodded, unaware of the chaos her observations had created. She focused solely on her task, reliving and conveying a night of fear, a scene most adults would have blurred or forgotten. The judge finally broke the silence, voice quiet but firm. "We will continue," noting the unusual circumstances. He paused, eyes on the toddler, then added, almost to himself, "Extraordinary indeed." Every adult in the courtroom understood the same truth. This child, with nothing but her tiny hands, her voice, and her astonishing clarity of memory, had captured the attention of everyone present. The K9's obedience was just one manifestation of a power few had witnessed. Something far larger, far more significant, was unfolding, and no one could yet predict its consequences. Suspense. How far does this connection between Toddler and K9 go? And could her uncanny precision reveal more than anyone expects, potentially altering the outcome of this case? The courtroom had grown impossibly quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made every sound, every movement, feel magnified. Even the humming of the ventilation system seemed deafening. The K9 remained perfectly still, muscles taut, eyes locked on the tiny figure guiding him, a 3-year-old girl whose quiet gestures held authority far beyond her years. Officers whispered under their breath, unable to comprehend the bond forming before them. The prosecutor leaned closer, careful not to startle her. "Can you show us what you did when you first saw him?" he asked. The toddler's dark eyes flicked toward her mother briefly, as though checking for permission. The mother nodded slightly, a small, reassuring gesture. The girl inhaled softly and then, almost imperceptibly, moved her fingers. It was subtle, a twitch of her index finger, the tilt of her hand, but the K9 responded immediately. He shifted, aligning his massive frame with her gesture. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the defense attorney, normally quick to scoff, paused, jaw tight, eyes narrowing. This was not a coincidence. Every motion, every twitch of the toddler's small hands carried meaning, and the dog obeyed instinctively. The prosecutor whispered gently, "Do you know why he stopped there?" The girl tilted her head, thinking. "Bag," she whispered, pointing with her tiny hand to a spot in the air near the defendant's chair. "Dropped." He ran past. Her fingers mimed the object hitting the ground, its motion precise, clear. The K9's ears twitched, muscles coiling as if he, too, recognized the significance of the item. Officers exchanged glances, their murmurs subdued, filled with disbelief. The child was directing the dog to critical evidence with nothing more than subtle, silent gestures. The mother explained, voice trembling slightly, that she had once been a volunteer in search and rescue missions. She had taught her daughter, in small doses over months, how to communicate with animals through micro-movements and hidden signals. It was intended as a playful game, never a tool for courtroom evidence, yet here it was, manifested with perfect precision. She learned how to guide animals without even speaking loud commands, the mother whispered. She's been practicing, quietly, carefully. The courtroom seemed to shift on its axis. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras zooming on the girl's hands, documenting the gestures with an intensity usually reserved for the most shocking evidence. The defense attorney's face tightened, realizing that this hidden skill, almost magical in its subtlety, could completely change the perception of the witness. The toddler's tiny hands moved again, pointing to another spot. "Fence, jump, hide," she murmured softly, the words almost inaudible. The K9 mirrored the motion, muscles coiled, eyes focused, ready for a command that had never been spoken aloud. The prosecutor's voice was calm, coaxing. And then, he ran past the dumpster, the toddler whispered, tilting her hands as though she were mapping invisible terrain. Her fingers traced the path exactly, following the movement of the suspect through the alley behind her home. The dog reacted with absolute obedience, following the invisible path she traced in the air. Even officers who had seen this dog respond to life-or-death situations looked on in awe, murmuring among themselves. Journalists, sensing the magnitude of the moment, began whispering excitedly to each other. Social media feeds would erupt. Cameras focused on the toddler's hands, her delicate gestures guiding a trained K9, capturing a story that was impossible to ignore. The defendant's face betrayed growing panic, his lips twitching, eyes darting toward the girl and the dog. He had been confident until now, sure that a toddler's testimony could be dismissed, but the evidence of her skill was undeniable. The mother, sensing the tension, whispered softly, "You're helping everyone understand. Just show them." The girl nodded subtly, rocking her rabbit for comfort while raising her other hand to demonstrate another movement. The K9 mirrored her gestures, every motion precise, obedient and responsive. Officers quietly confirmed what they were witnessing. This child had guided the dog with subtle signals no adult had taught the animal. It was a skill born of instinct, patience, and meticulous practice. The prosecutor's tone grew gentle but urgent. "Can you tell us what the suspect did when he saw the police?" The toddler's gaze became intense, her voice calm yet deliberate. "He ran fast, scared, behind the fence. Bag dropped." She mimed the motion again, showing the fall of the bag, the path of the suspect's flight, the momentary pause as he scrambled over obstacles. The K9 shifted in unison, muscles taut, ears pricked, perfectly aligned with her gestures. The courtroom murmured. Officers whispered incredulously to one another. The defense attorney's attempts to undermine the testimony faltered in the face of such undeniable coordination between child and dog. Even the judge, who had maintained decades of control in his courtroom, leaned forward, captivated by the scene. Cameras zoomed in, recording the tableau. A toddler, a stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, guiding a trained K9 through movements that mapped the crime scene with perfect precision. Then the child whispered, almost to herself, almost too softly for anyone to hear. "He hid, corner, blue car." The K9's massive body tensed immediately. Officers gasped. The detail matched the scene almost exactly. The suspect had crouched behind a blue sedan in the alley. Every motion the toddler mimed, the bag, the jumps over fences, the pauses at corners, corresponded with the physical evidence. The courtroom was silent but for the subtle sounds of pens scratching, cameras clicking, and the low growl of the K-9. The mother's voice trembled slightly as she explained further. She's been practicing this as a game, but it's more than a game. She has a connection, an understanding of how to communicate with animals, and she's applying it now, instinctively. The weight of her words hung in the air. No one could dismiss this as imagination or coincidence. The defendant shifted uneasily, realizing the magnitude of what was unfolding. This tiny girl, only 3 years old, had not only witnessed the crime but had recalled every detail with precision, guiding the K-9 to critical evidence, demonstrating knowledge and skill beyond comprehension. The judge leaned back, hands pressed to his desk, eyes fixed on the child. Even he felt the weight of disbelief and awe pressing down like gravity. The toddler's next movements were slight, almost imperceptible, a tilt of her head, a flick of a finger, a tiny nod. Yet the K-9 responded instantly. Officers scribbled notes frantically. Cameras zoomed. The energy in the room was electric, a combination of awe, disbelief, and the gripping tension of watching the impossible unfold in real time. Finally, in a whisper deliberate and clear, she said, "He ran, didn't see me." The courtroom froze. Every officer, every journalist, every lawyer, every adult in the room felt the intensity of that statement. This child had seen, remembered, and now communicated with an authority that demanded attention. The K-9 remained perfectly still, obedient, as if acknowledging the truth of her words. The courtroom held its breath, waiting for the next revelation. Suspense. How did this toddler acquire such extraordinary skill? Could she have guided the investigation entirely through these hidden signals? And what other secrets of the night would she reveal next? The courtroom had descended into a surreal stillness. Every adult present, judge, attorneys, officers, journalists, felt the weight of the moment pressing down, thick and electric. The toddler, perched on her mother's lap, rocked her stuffed rabbit gently, eyes unwavering as she surveyed the room. The K-9 remained alert, muscles coiled, ears swiveling in perfect synchronicity with her subtle gestures. It was no longer merely testimony. It was a silent choreography of truth, unfolding before the eyes of a stunned courtroom. The prosecutor's voice was calm but deliberate, aiming to coax clarity from the tiny witness. "Can you tell us what happened after he dropped the bag?" he asked. The toddler's lips pressed together thoughtfully. Her tiny hand lifted slightly, her fingers tracing the invisible path of the suspect's escape. "Ran fast, past dumpster, then fence," she whispered, each word deliberate, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. The K-9 reacted instantly to her gestures, shifting slightly, muscles taut, eyes trained on the invisible path she traced in the air. Officers exchanged incredulous glances. This was a dog trained for danger and obedience, reacting not to its handler's commands but to a 3-year-old child's subtle cues. The realization swept through the room like a shockwave. The girl wasn't merely recalling events. She was controlling the narrative, directing attention to every critical detail with precision beyond belief. The mother's voice quivered as she leaned forward, whispering softly to the girl, "Tell them what else you remember, sweetheart. They need to know." The toddler nodded faintly, tilting her head, dark eyes narrowing as if recalling the entire scene from memory. She pointed to an imaginary spot in the air, then softly said, "Scratches, jacket red." She mimed the marks across the suspect's coat with delicate, deliberate finger movements. The courtroom collectively inhaled. Officers checked the evidence. The scratches were exactly where she indicated, perfectly matching the physical proof they had collected at the scene. The defense attorney stiffened in his chair, lips pressed tight, eyes flicking between the girl and the evidence on the table. He whispered sharply to his client, the defendant, but the man's gaze betrayed growing panic. The tiny witness, unaware of the courtroom drama unfolding around her, continued to recreate the events with uncanny accuracy. Every motion, every word, every gesture corroborated the evidence in a way adults had struggled to piece together. The judge leaned forward, eyes fixed on the toddler. He could feel the weight of disbelief pressing against him, but also an undeniable recognition of the truth. "We will proceed," he murmured. "Let the witness speak." Cameras zoomed, pens scratched frantically, and reporters leaned in, capturing every delicate gesture, every whispered word. The prosecutor prompted gently, "Can you tell us where he went after the fence?" The toddler's small hand traced another path, moving slowly but deliberately. "Blue car, corner, hide," she whispered, her tiny fingers mimicking the man crouching behind the vehicle. The K-9 stiffened once more, muscles taut, eyes focused on the child. Officers exchanged silent glances. The level of precision, the ability to recall, was almost impossible to dismiss. Then came the moment that froze the courtroom completely. With her voice calm yet sharp and precise, the toddler said, "He saw police, scared, ran." Her gaze shifted toward the defendant, who sat frozen in his chair. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his hands clenched tight in nervous fists. The courtroom murmured quietly, sensing the power of her words. Every adult felt the sudden, chilling realization that the child had reconstructed the suspect's movements entirely, leading directly to a point of capture. The defendant's face blanched. His lawyer whispered urgently, trying to regain control, but the evidence was mounting in real time, corroborated by the K-9, the toddler, and the physical artifacts from the crime scene. The prosecutor nodded toward the toddler, coaxing, "Can you show us exactly where he went?" The girl rose slightly on her mother's lap, balancing carefully. She gestured with her hands, mapping out the exact path the suspect had taken. Every tiny motion was precise. Past the alley, around the dumpsters, over the fence, crouching behind the blue sedan. The K-9 reacted at each cue, responding with an obedience that seemed almost supernatural. The officers whispered to each other. A child had not only recalled events with astonishing accuracy, but had guided a trained police dog through the evidence, in real time, pointing to the path the suspect had taken and the items he had dropped. The mother whispered again, almost inaudibly, "You're helping them see everything." The toddler nodded faintly, eyes flicking back to the defendant. She was calm, collected, and terrifyingly precise. Cameras zoomed in on her gestures as she mimed the final movement, the suspect crouching, trying to hide. Her finger hovered in the air, as if drawing the invisible lines the man had traced in his flight from the law. The K-9 growled low in response, muscles tensing. The handler whispered under his breath, "He's never done this, never responded like this before." Officers nodded silently, trying not to let their astonishment show. The courtroom had transformed into a theater of disbelief, a toddler, a K-9, and a suspect frozen by the precision of memory and instinct. Finally, she whispered again, her small voice carrying more weight than anyone could have imagined. "Caught. Bag. Behind." She indicated the exact location where the police had intercepted the suspect and recovered the stolen goods. The K-9's massive body remained perfectly aligned with her gestures, obedient in a way that validated every detail she had provided. The defendant's hands trembled, sweat glistening on his forehead. His eyes darted around the room, finally locking on the girl whose words and gestures had unraveled his carefully constructed plan. The defense attorney whispered frantically, but even he could not counter the devastating precision of the toddler's account. The prosecutor, sensing the moment, leaned closer. "Can you tell us what he did when he realized the police were there?" The girl's voice was calm yet sharp, her words deliberate. "He stopped, scared, hands up." She mimed the gesture as though placing invisible hands in the air, a perfect reenactment of the moment the suspect surrendered. The K-9's posture mirrored her description, muscles coiled but obedient, a living testament to her unique insight. The courtroom was still. Every officer, journalist, and lawyer absorbed the scene with wide eyes and tense anticipation. No one dared speak. Even the judge, experienced and composed, could feel his pulse quicken. This was not a typical courtroom. It was a stage where innocence, instinct, and extraordinary perception converged in real time. Then the toddler looked directly at the defendant. Her voice, quiet but unwavering, carried across the courtroom. "You did it, all of it." The room froze. Officers exhaled slowly, the weight of her accusation settling like a stone in the pit of their stomachs. The defendant's face drained of color, his lips trembling, eyes wide with disbelief. The courtroom had transformed. A child's simple words, backed by her gestures and the obedient K9, had compelled a confession without a single adult raising a hand in anger or threat. Cameras captured every second. The quiet authority of a toddler, the unshakable obedience of a trained police dog, and the unfolding collapse of a man caught in his own crimes. Journalists scribbled furiously, whispering to each other about the unprecedented story they were witnessing. Social media would explode before the day ended. The mother bent slightly, whispering encouragement. "You're so brave." The toddler nodded faintly, eyes returning to the K9, her focus unbroken. She had done more than recount events. She had orchestrated the narrative, guided the evidence, and revealed the truth with an authority no one could ignore. The judge cleared his throat, voice low and deliberate. "The court acknowledges the testimony and evidence presented by the witness. Extraordinary indeed." The courtroom buzzed quietly with tension and awe, every adult aware that this case had shifted irrevocably because of a 3-year-old's courage and skill. Suspense. Could this tiny witness, with her extraordinary perception and unspoken bond with the K9, completely determine the outcome of the trial? And what final revelations would she provide before the verdict is delivered? The courtroom seemed to pulse with tension, each second stretching impossibly long. The toddler, perched on her mother's lap, rocked gently, her dark eyes unblinking, fixated on the defendant. The K9, massive and imposing, remained perfectly still, muscles taut, eyes trained on the girl. Every adult present felt the surreal weight of the moment. A child guiding a trained police dog, reconstructing a crime scene, and compelling attention and authority far beyond her years. The jury, seated just a few feet away, leaned forward instinctively. Their expressions shifted from curiosity to awe to disbelief. Even seasoned jurors, accustomed to dissecting complex testimony, struggled to reconcile what they were witnessing. A 3-year-old was directing not only attention but action, commanding the room with subtle gestures and quiet words. They whispered among themselves, eyes wide, scribbling notes with shaking hands. The prosecutor stood, voice calm but deliberate, careful to maintain control of the room. "Can you show us exactly what happened when the suspect realized the police were there?" The toddler shifted slightly on her mother's lap, hands mimicking the suspect's motions. "Stopped, scared, hands up," she whispered, tracing an invisible surrender with tiny fingers. The K9's body mirrored her every gesture. Officers, astonished, exchanged quiet murmurs. The path she traced aligned perfectly with the evidence collected. The suspect's movements, the bag he had dropped, the fence he had vaulted over. Every motion, every detail was exact. The defense attorney, growing frantic, rose abruptly. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. A child cannot provide testimony of such complexity, nor can a dog respond to her untrained signals. This is absurd." The judge raised a hand, steadying the room. "Sit down. Let the record reflect the testimony is continuing." Even he, experienced and composed, could not hide the subtle tension in his eyes. Every observer in the courtroom sensed something extraordinary unfolding. A tiny witness wielding authority over evidence, recollection, and a trained K9, leaving no room for dismissal. The prosecutor's tone softened, coaxing clarity. "Do you remember where he tried to hide?" The toddler's lips pressed together in thought, eyes narrowing. Her tiny fingers traced a path in the air, mapping the alley's twists and obstacles. "Blue car, corner, crouch bag." The K9 reacted immediately, muscles coiled, ears swiveling, mirroring her gestures with flawless precision. Officers whispered in disbelief. Every detail she communicated had been previously corroborated by the physical evidence. The suspect's exact route, his hiding place, and the location of the stolen bag. The mother leaned slightly forward, whispering encouragement. "Show them, sweetheart. Just show them what you saw." The toddler nodded faintly, her small hand moving in deliberate, meticulous arcs. Every motion reconstructed the suspect's flight, from the alleyway to the final point of surrender. Cameras clicked, journalists scribbled, and the audience in the gallery leaned forward, captivated. The defendant's face turned pale. Panic flickered in his eyes. His carefully constructed defense, built on the assumption that a toddler's testimony could be dismissed, began to crumble. Every gesture the child made aligned perfectly with the timeline and evidence collected by trained officers. The K-9, obedient and precise, provided a silent corroboration of her account. It was a demonstration of truth that left no room for skepticism. The prosecutor leaned closer, voice low and gentle. "What did he do when he saw you?" The toddler's eyes, dark and intense, locked on the defendant. Looked scared, ran fast. Her tiny hands mimicked the motion of the man sprinting, his path over fences and around obstacles replicated in the air above the courtroom floor. The K-9 mirrored her gestures, muscles taut, eyes unwavering. Officers whispered to each other, murmurs filled with disbelief. How could such a small child hold command over a creature trained for precision and danger? The jury watched, captivated. Each juror's notes were filled with both astonishment and disbelief. Many leaned forward, unable to tear their eyes away from the toddler, the K-9, and the defendant, whose panic was growing with each word, each gesture. Cameras clicked relentlessly, broadcasting the scene in real time to the press and soon to the wider world. Then, almost imperceptibly, the toddler leaned forward and whispered something that froze the courtroom completely. "You did it, all of it." The words were tiny, soft, yet carried more authority than any adult voice in the room. The defendant's body froze, sweat glistening on his forehead. His hands trembled uncontrollably. The defense attorney tried to intervene, whispering urgently, but the courtroom held its collective breath. The child's assertion had the weight of truth, and the K-9's silent corroboration added an undeniable force to her claim. Journalists scribbled frantically, capturing every detail: the quiet authority of a toddler, the obedient precision of the K-9, and the panic etched across the defendant's face. Social media would explode before the day ended. The scene was cinematic, almost surreal. Innocence and instinct aligned to expose a truth no adult had fully grasped until now. The judge leaned forward slightly, voice calm but deliberate. "We will note the extraordinary testimony and evidence presented. The court acknowledges the unusual circumstances." He paused, glancing at the jury. "Proceed with caution and record all details." The courtroom buzzed quietly, tension heavy in the air. Every adult felt it. The moment had irrevocably shifted the balance of the case. The prosecutor nodded, encouraging the child softly. "Can you show us exactly how it ended?" The toddler lifted her tiny hands again, tracing the path of the suspect's final escape. Caught, hands up, bag behind. She mimicked the surrender, pausing briefly to indicate the precise spot where the police intercepted the suspect. The K-9 remained rigid, obedient, an extension of her movements. Officers whispered in astonishment, double-checking their notes. Every detail she provided aligned perfectly with known evidence, down to the minute. The mother leaned slightly, whispering, "You're amazing. They see everything now." The toddler nodded faintly, rocking her rabbit as if drawing strength from it. Her gaze remained steady, focused, unwavering. She had done more than testify. She had reconstructed the crime scene, guided a trained K-9, and exposed the truth with precision no one had anticipated. The jury exchanged looks, scribbling furiously. Their whispers were barely audible, filled with awe and disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this," one juror whispered. "A child controlling a K-9 and the details match perfectly." Another nodded, pen moving rapidly. They could not ignore the evidence. The toddler's gestures, words, and the K-9's obedience had revealed the sequence of events in exact detail. The defendant's panic grew, his breathing rapid, hands trembling. He looked toward his attorney, who whispered desperately, but it was too late. The room was saturated with proof, corroborated not just by physical evidence, but by a child whose courage, perception, and hidden skill left no room for doubt. The judge cleared his throat, signaling the next stage of proceedings. The jury, captivated, leaned forward, their eyes never leaving the toddler. Cameras recorded every moment. Reporters scribbled notes, murmuring quietly. The energy in the courtroom was electric, a mix of disbelief, awe, and the anticipation of the final revelation. Then the toddler, small and unwavering, whispered once more, "He cannot hide. We saw everything." The courtroom exhaled collectively. Every adult, every officer, every juror understood the magnitude of her words. The defendant's world had collapsed under the quiet, precise authority of a 3-year-old. The K9 remained perfectly still, a living testament to the truth she had revealed. Every observer sensed the storm that would follow. Suspense. The toddler has revealed the crime and guided the evidence with uncanny precision. But how will the jury respond? Will her extraordinary testimony be enough to secure justice? Or is there one final revelation that will leave everyone in the courtroom frozen? The courtroom felt suspended in time. Every adult present, judge, attorneys, officers, jurors, journalists, held their collective breath. The toddler, perched on her mother's lap, clutched her rabbit tightly, eyes wide but unwavering. The K9, massive and imposing, remained motionless, perfectly obedient, as if aware that the moment had reached its apex. Every subtle gesture, every word, every glance had built to this instant. The verdict. The jury foreperson rose slowly, eyes scanning the room before settling on the judge. The hush was almost unbearable, broken only by the low hum of the ventilation system and the quiet scribbles of reporters taking notes. The courtroom's energy was taut, as if everyone could feel the gravity of the decision about to be delivered. The judge cleared his throat, voice calm yet carrying the weight of decades of authority. "Members of the jury, have you reached a unanimous decision?" The foreperson nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." She paused, drawing a deep breath. The courtroom seemed to lean forward collectively. Cameras focused, pens scratched frantically, and every adult in the room instinctively leaned in. The verdict would decide the fate of the man who had underestimated a 3-year-old girl, a tiny force of clarity and instinct. "Please announce your verdict." The foreperson's voice rang out, firm and deliberate, yet a slight tremor betrayed the tension she felt. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all charges." A ripple ran through the room. The defendant froze, disbelief etched across his face. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. Officers exhaled slowly, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Even the judge leaned back in his chair slightly, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. Every adult in the courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be recounted for years. A toddler had guided a K9, reconstructed a crime scene, and compelled justice through nothing but her courage, perception, and subtle gestures. The toddler's gaze shifted slightly, dark eyes meeting the K9's for a fleeting second. The massive dog sat obediently, muscles still taut, as if acknowledging her silent authority. Officers whispered quietly, amazed at the bond that had formed, a connection born of instinct, trust, and an unspoken understanding. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing the scene that would dominate headlines, social media feeds, and public imagination. The mother bent slightly, whispering softly, "You did it. You helped everyone see." The toddler nodded faintly, rocking her rabbit, seemingly unaware of the profound impact she had made. Her small hands had directed attention, reconstructed evidence, and exposed the truth with a clarity few adults could match. The defendant's attorney, defeated and pale, whispered urgently to his client, but the man shook his head, eyes wide with disbelief. He had believed he could manipulate the proceedings, rely on adult skepticism of a child's testimony, but he had underestimated the precision, courage, and insight of a toddler. Every detail she had recalled, the path, the bag, the fence, the hiding place, and even the scratches on his jacket, had been corroborated by evidence and the reactions of the K9. There was no room left for denial. The prosecutor exhaled slowly, nodding to the judge. "Your Honor, the testimony of the witness, combined with corroborating evidence, has provided a clear, undeniable sequence of events. The court's attention to detail confirms the accuracy and integrity of this testimony." The judge, steady but visibly moved, nodded. "Indeed, this court recognizes the extraordinary nature of this testimony. The verdict is accepted." He tapped the gavel lightly. The sound reverberated through the courtroom, a final punctuation to the tension that had gripped every person present. Officers led the defendant away, his face pale, his hands trembling. The courtroom exhaled collectively, the tension slowly dissipating. Journalists scrambled, capturing the last images. The toddler, small but unyielding, sitting with her mother, the K9 obediently by her side, every gesture, every detail, a testament to courage and truth. The mother whispered softly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You were brave. You helped everyone see the truth." The toddler, eyes still wide, gave a faint nod. Her small voice, almost drowned out by the shuffling of officers and murmurs of reporters, whispered again, "I saw it, all of it." The K9 shifted slightly, leaning against her legs as if acknowledging her bravery. Officers exchanged quiet smiles. "Never seen anything like that in my career," one murmured. Another nodded. "She's incredible, and that dog, it's like they were connected." Outside the courtroom, cameras flashed. Reporters whispered frantically into microphones. Social media feeds lit up instantly. Toddler guides police K9, secures guilty verdict in dramatic courtroom scene. Clips of her gestures, the K9's obedience, and the stunned reactions of the courtroom were shared thousands of times within minutes. The story would become legendary. A child whose bravery and skill changed the outcome of a case, guiding justice with subtle signals no one expected. The mother gently lifted her daughter from the seat. The toddler hugged her rabbit tightly, eyes wide but calm. "You were amazing," the mother whispered. The girl tilted her head, small hands brushing her mother's arms. "Helped him see," she whispered. The simplicity of her words, yet the weight behind them, left a quiet echo in the hearts of everyone who witnessed the scene. Officers guided the K9 outside for a short break. The dog remained calm but alert, responding instinctively to the toddler's presence. Journalists hovered, cameras clicking, capturing the subtle, extraordinary bond between child and animal. The moment had transcended normal courtroom drama. It was cinematic, emotional, and unforgettable. The judge, clearing his desk, leaned back slightly, eyes reflecting a rare mixture of awe and relief. "I have presided over countless trials, but this is extraordinary," he murmured. Officers nodded, still shaken by the clarity and precision of the child's testimony and by the obedience of the K9. The courtroom emptied gradually, the energy still lingering in the air like electricity after a storm. Reporters spoke in hushed tones about the unprecedented collaboration between a toddler and a trained K9, the way subtle gestures could convey truth more powerfully than words alone, and how courage could manifest in the most unexpected form. Outside, the mother lifted her daughter into her arms. "You did so well," she whispered. The toddler, clutching her rabbit, looked up, dark eyes serious. "He can't hide," she murmured. And in that simple phrase lay the culmination of her bravery, clarity, and instinct, the culmination of a story that would be remembered for years to come. The K9 sat patiently beside them, ears alert, eyes trained on the girl, as if waiting for her next gesture. Officers quietly approached, offering gentle pats and murmured congratulations. Even in the chaos of reporters and flashing cameras, the bond remained intact, child and dog, extraordinary partners in uncovering truth. The defendant was led to a holding area, face pale, panic still lingering in his eyes. He had underestimated the quiet power of observation, the courage of a child, and the connection between human instinct and animal training. His fate was sealed, determined not by force or intimidation, but by clarity, bravery, and an unspoken, extraordinary skill. The story would spread, whispered in police stations, recounted in courtrooms, shared across the nation. Headlines would declare, "Toddler guides police K9 to justice, courtroom left frozen in awe." But for those who had been there, the memory of the small figure, quiet yet unyielding, guiding a massive K9, exposing the truth with subtle gestures, would remain far more profound than any headline could capture. And in the quiet moments afterward, the mother whispered again, "You helped them all see." The toddler, holding her rabbit, tilted her head, eyes wide, calm, confident. "I saw it," she whispered. And that simple statement, so innocent yet so powerful, encapsulated the extraordinary journey of courage, observation, and truth that had transformed a courtroom, and the lives within it, forever. The courtroom was empty now, but the image remained. A tiny girl, a faithful K9, and a moment of justice delivered through observation, instinct, and unwavering courage. Every adult who had witnessed it would carry the memory for the rest of their lives. End of story.